He looked me dead in the eye and asked for $240,000. For a woman he'd known 8 months that I already knew where every dollar of that investment was really going. That I run 2 hardware stores in Dayton, Ohio. Started with one, in a strip mall nobody wanted, back when the rent was cheap because nothing else would take the space. 31 years of 6 a.m. mornings so my son Caleb could have things I never did. A college degree. A car that started every time. A father who was still standing at the end of the day instead of face down on a factory floor like mine was. You'd think that buys you something. A little trust, maybe. Turns out it buys you a Sunday dinner where your son sits across the table and asks you to hand a stranger $250,000. It was an ordinary Sunday. My wife Diane had made pot roast, the good kind, the kind she only makes when she wants everyone in a decent mood before something difficult gets said. I didn't know yet that the difficult thing was coming from our side of the table. Caleb showed up with Brooke. 8 months they'd been together. Pretty girl, sharp too, in the way that makes you count the silverware after she leaves. She hugged Diane at the door, complimented the roast before she'd even tasted it, and settled into the chair across from me like she'd been sitting there her whole life. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "Caleb talks about you constantly. 2 hardware stores from nothing. That's incredible." "It wasn't nothing," I said. "It was a lot of overtime." She smiled at that, a half-second too late, like she was translating it from a language she didn't quite speak. We got through most of the meal fine. Diane asked about her job, marketing, something with a non-profit, vague enough that I couldn't picture what she actually did all day. Caleb checked his phone under the table 3 times that I counted. Brooke kept the conversation moving, easy, warm, aimed at everyone except me. I noticed that. I always noticed that. Dessert came out and Caleb cleared his throat the way he used to when he was 12 and about to tell me he'd dented the garage door. "So, Dad. Brooke and I wanted to talk to you about something. There it is. We found an opportunity. It's real estate, kind of. Tied into a new fund." "What kind of fund?" Brooke leaned in, smooth as anything. "It's called Meridian Capital Partners. My cousin runs the operations side. They're buying distressed properties in Florida, renovating, flipping them fast. The returns so far have been incredible. 40% in under 6 months. 40%. I let that number sit in the air a second before I said anything. "And how much would this cost me?" Caleb looked at Brooke. Brooke looked at her wine glass. $240,000, Caleb said. "For our stake." "It's actually a steal, Dad. The minimum buy-in usually starts higher, but because of Brooke's cousin, $240,000, I repeated. "For a real estate fund you heard about 8 months ago from a woman I met an hour ago. Dad, does this fund have a registration number? An SEC filing? Anything?" Diane's hand found my knee under the table. A warning squeeze, 29 years of marriage worth of warning packed into 4 fingers. "It's a private fund," Brooke said, still smiling. "It doesn't need to be registered the way public funds do. My cousin's very careful about that. Keeps it exclusive. Keeps it exclusive." I've heard that phrase before, more than once, and it has never once preceded good news. Here's the thing nobody at that table knew yet, except me. I'd already heard the name Meridian Capital Partners. 2 weeks earlier. From a man named Roy Castellano, who does fraud consulting for 2 of the banks I work with, and who happened to mention over lunch that a fund by that name had come up on a watch list out of Tampa that I hadn't told Caleb. I wanted to see if he'd bring it to me himself, honestly, before I ever had to say a word. And now here we were, and he had, except it wasn't a warning. It was a request for money. I did some digging on this, I said. About 2 weeks ago. The change on Caleb's face was instant. You did what? I made some calls after you mentioned it to your mother the first time. He turned to Diane. She didn't flinch. Just met his eyes steady, like she'd expected that look and made her peace with it already. You told him? Caleb said. I'm your mother, not your business partner, Diane said. Of course I told him. That's what happens in this family when somebody's about to do something reckless. The people who love you talk to each other. It's not reckless, it's an opportunity. Meridian Capital Partners isn't registered with the SEC, I said. Not as an investment advisor, not as a broker-dealer, not under any exemption I could find. There's no property deed I could trace to the addresses your girlfriend's cousin claims they've flipped. And a friend of mine who investigates exactly this kind of thing for a living told me the name 2 weeks before either of you ever said it to me. Brooke's smile finally cracked. Just at the edges. Just enough. That's not, you must have the wrong fund, she said. There could be another company with a similar name. Michelle Voss, I said, and watched her face for the first time actually go still. Does that name mean anything to you? Nobody answered. But something in the room had already shifted, and everyone at that table felt it. Caleb stood up so fast his chair scraped hard against the patio stone. You're unbelievable. You're actually trying to accuse Brooke of something at dinner, in front of everyone. I'm not accusing anybody of anything. I'm telling you what I found. You've never trusted a single decision I've made. Not the degree, not the job, not Brooke. Every time I try to build something, you're already 3 steps ahead trying to tear it down. I'm trying to keep you from losing $250,000, son. It's not about the money. It's that you can't stand the idea that I found something on my own, that I believe in something you didn't hand me. That one landed harder than he probably meant it to. I felt my own voice tighten for the first time all night. I have believed in you your whole life, Caleb. Believing in you and handing you $240,000 for a stranger's cousin's shell company are 2 very different things. She's not a stranger. She's the woman I'm going to marry. The table went quiet at that. Diane's hand tightened on my knee. Brooke looked down at her plate, and for the first time that night, I watched her carefully, and I still couldn't tell if what I was seeing on her face was embarrassment or calculation. Congratulations, I said quietly. Now sit down, and let's talk about this like adults instead of storming off like you're 17. He didn't sit down. He grabbed Brooke's hand, said something short to his mother about calling her tomorrow, and walked the 2 of them out through the side gate to his car. I sat there at my own table, a piece of pie in front of me I wasn't going to finish, and Diane looked at me like she wasn't sure whether to be angry at him or at me. You could have waited, she said. Told him privately. I tried to tell him privately 2 weeks ago. He didn't want to hear it then either. That night I didn't sleep much. I lay there running the whole dinner back like game film. Meridian Capital Partners. Michelle Voss, if that name even applied here, if Brooke was connected to it at all or if I was reaching 40% returns in 6 months. A cousin nobody had ever met. A private fund that kept itself exclusive by staying invisible to every regulator in the country. My son is not a stupid man. Which means somebody had worked very hard, and very patiently, over 8 months, to make him stop thinking like one. Caleb didn't call for 3 days. I let it sit, because pushing at that point would have only made him dig in harder, and 31 years of raising that boy had taught me that some lessons only take root when a man thinks he found the dirt himself. On the 4th day, Roy called me back. You were asking about Meridian Capital, he said. I did some more digging after you called. And? It's not registered anywhere, like I told you. But I found something else. There's a woman named Michelle Voss who's come up twice before under different fund names, tied to real estate schemes. Once in Charlotte, 18 months ago. Once outside Nashville before that. Same structure both times. Fake fund, guaranteed returns, a young woman as the front, and a boyfriend who goes to his family for the capital. My stomach turned over slow, like a truck engine trying to catch in the cold. Is Brooke Ellis connected to Michelle Voss? Working on it. Give me a few more days. I hung up and sat in my truck in the parking lot of my own store for a long while before I went inside. Here's what I want you to understand about the next 2 weeks, because I think about it more than almost anything else in this whole story. I had information that could have ended this instantly. I could have called Caleb, laid it all out, and probably stopped him from sending a single dollar, but I also knew my son. And I knew if I came at him too hard, too fast, with an accusation he couldn't yet verify himself, he would dig his heels in and protect Brooke out of pure stubbornness, the same way he'd protected every bad decision he'd ever made since he was a teenager, right up until the moment reality caught up with him on its own. I waited. And I watched. And I hated every single day of it. Diane thought I was being cold. He's our son, Arthur. You know, something that could save him a fortune and you're sitting on it because of pride? It's not pride, I told her. If I hand him the answer, he finds a way to explain it away, because he wants to believe her more than he wants to believe me right now. He has to see it himself, or it won't stick, and he'll be vulnerable to the next one of these that comes along. She didn't like it. I didn't much like it either. But I'd learned that about my son a long, long time ago. 10 days after the dinner, Caleb called. His voice had a different weight to it than I'd heard in months. Dad. Can we talk? I'm at the store. Come by. He showed up an hour later, and he didn't look like a man about to defend his girlfriend anymore. He looked like a man carrying something heavy he didn't know how to put down. I sent the money, he said. My chest went cold. All of it? No. Not the full amount yet. 60,000. As a good faith deposit, to lock in our spot before the round closed. Brooke said if we didn't move fast, someone else would take it. There it is. That's the play. Urgency. Always urgency, because urgency is what keeps a man from doing the one thing that would save him, slowing down. Where did you get $60,000, Caleb? He wouldn't look at me. I took a loan against my 401k. And some of it was savings. And the rest of the $240. When's that due? End of the month. I was going to ask you again. Formally. With paperwork this time, so you'd feel better about it. I set down the wrench I'd been holding. Son, I need you to hear something, and I need you to actually hear it, not just wait for me to stop talking so you can defend her again. He nodded, slow, like some part of him already knew what was coming. I've had someone looking into Meridian Capital Partners for almost 3 weeks now. It's not registered. It's never been registered. The properties your cousin claims to have flipped don't have deeds I can trace to any LLC connected to that name. Maybe they're under a different holding company, Caleb. There's a woman named Michelle Voss who's run this exact scheme twice before, under 2 different fund names, in 2 different cities. Charlotte, 18 months ago. Nashville before that. His face had gone the color of old paper. That has nothing to do with Brooke. Her cousin, Caleb. The one who supposedly runs Meridian. What's her full name? Silence. You don't know, do you? I said. You've never met her. You've never spoken to her. Everything you know about this fund came from Brooke. She's shown me statements. Screenshots of returns. Screenshots can be made by anybody with an hour and a laptop. He sat down hard in the chair by my desk, the same chair customers sit in when they're returning something broken. I already sent $60,000, Dad. I know. What do I do? You call your bank right now, and you find out if there's any way to reverse that wire before it settles. And you call Brooke, and you ask her, directly, for her cousin's full legal name and a copy of the fund's SEC exemption filing. Today. Not next week. He called Brooke from my office. I stood there and listened, and I watched my son's face change in real time as her answers got vaguer and vaguer, and the warmth in her voice on the other end of that call started to sound, even to me, standing 3 feet away, less like affection and more like a woman working a script she'd used before. He hung up. Didn't say anything for a full minute. She got defensive, he finally said. Said I was letting you poison things again. Said if I really trusted her I wouldn't need paperwork. That's the answer, son. Right there. That's the whole answer. The bank couldn't reverse the wire. $60,000, gone, sitting in an account that traced back not to any business entity, but to a personal checking account under the name Brooke Ellis, personal. Not corporate. Not the fund's operating account. Hers. I watched that piece of information land on my son like a physical blow. He didn't say anything for a long time. Just sat there in my office with his phone in his hand, staring at a number that used to feel like the beginning of a life and now felt like the end of his savings. I want to talk to her in person, he said. Tonight. Then I'm coming with you. Dad, I'm 27. I can handle my own girlfriend. You handled $60,000 into a stranger's checking account. Humor me. He didn't argue, which told me more about where his confidence actually stood than anything he could have said out loud. We drove to her apartment that evening. The lights were on. Her car was in the lot. But when we knocked, nobody answered, and when Caleb called her phone, it went straight to voicemail. We waited 40 minutes in that parking lot. Around 9, the building super came out to take the trash to the dumpster, and Caleb, in a voice I barely recognized, asked him if he'd seen the woman in Unit 4C. She moved out 3 days ago, the man said. Paid to break the lease early. Didn't leave a forwarding address. 3 days ago. Before Caleb had even asked her the hard questions. Before the call in my office. She was already gone before either of us knew to be suspicious of the timeline. Caleb didn't say a word the whole drive home. When we pulled into my driveway instead of his apartment, he looked at me, confused. You're staying with us tonight, I said. Your mother's making up the guest room. Dad, I have my own place. You have a lease you can barely afford now that $60,000 of your savings is gone, and I don't want you alone tonight. Humor me again. He didn't argue that time either. The next 2 weeks were the hardest of that whole year, and I say that having lived through some hard years. Caleb went quiet in a way that worried me more than the shouting ever had. He went to work, came home, ate dinner without saying much, and disappeared into the guest room. Diane tried to draw him out gently, the way mothers do. I mostly left him alone, because I remembered being 27 once too, and I remembered that some kinds of shame need privacy before they'll turn into anything useful. Roy called again about 10 days after Brooke disappeared. Confirmed it, he said. Brooke Ellis and Michelle Voss are connected. Same woman, actually, going by two names depending on the city. Ellis is her mother's maiden name. She's done this in at least 3 states now that we can prove, always the same pattern. Young man with access to family money, always through a boyfriend, never asking for the funds herself, always a cousin or a friend fronting the actual scheme so she stays one step removed if it falls apart. Can this be prosecuted? Working with the Ohio Attorney General's fraud unit now. It'll take time. These things always do. But you should know, you're not the only family this has happened to. There's at least one other father, in Nashville, who lost significantly more than $60,000 before he caught it. I told Caleb that night, sitting across from him at the kitchen table after Diane had gone to bed. She's done this before, son. Twice, that we know of. You weren't special to her. You were a way in. He didn't cry. Not right away. He just sat there very still, turning a coffee mug in slow circles on the table. I feel like an idiot, he said finally. You're 27, and you fell for someone who's clearly very good at this. That doesn't make you an idiot. It makes you human. But I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Okay. Why didn't you believe me at that dinner? I told you, straight out, before you sent a single dollar. He was quiet a long moment. Because it felt like you were trying to control who I loved. Same as the business degree, same as everything. You've never just, let me choose something without checking your work first. I wasn't checking your work, Caleb. I was trying to keep you from exactly this conversation. This chair. This mug going in circles at 11 at night. I know that now. I need you to know it in a way that sticks. Not just tonight, while it's still raw. A year from now, when the next person comes along with a good story and an easy answer. He looked up at me. So what do I do differently? You slow down. Every single time somebody creates urgency around your money, that's the signal to slow down, not speed up. Real opportunities can survive a background check. Only fake ones need you to move before you think. 3 weeks after Brooke disappeared, Caleb sat me down at the same kitchen table and told me he wanted to talk business. I've been thinking, he said. I still want to do something real. Something in real estate, actually, but the right way this time. Licensed, registered, everything documented. I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for almost 2 months. I'm listening. I don't have the $60,000 back. I know that. But I was hoping, if I put together an actual business plan, something you could pick apart the way you should have been allowed to pick apart Meridian before I signed anything, you'd consider being a part of it. Not a bailout. A real partnership, with terms. I sat with that for a moment. 27 years old, sitting across from me with a mug of coffee gone cold, asking to earn something instead of just be handed it. There's a trust, I told him. I never mentioned it because I wanted you to build something on your own first, the way I did. But it's there. 200,000, been growing since you turned 18. It was always going to be yours when you were ready to use it for something real. His face went through about 4 different emotions in the space of 5 seconds. You had that this whole time? While I was panicking about the 60,000? I did. And I'm not handing it to you tonight, either. It comes with conditions now. A real plan. Numbers I get to challenge. Every assumption defended before a single dollar moves. That's fair, he said, and he meant it in a way he hadn't meant much of anything in weeks. That's more than fair. It's been 8 months since that dinner. Caleb's business plan took him 6 weeks to put together properly, and I tore through 3 drafts of it before I signed off on the 4th. He's since closed on his first property, legitimate, licensed, every deed and permit exactly where it should be, using a fraction of that trust, with the rest held back until he's proven the first deal works the way he says it will. Roy's investigation led to a warrant. Brooke, or Michelle, whichever name she's using this month, was picked up in Georgia running the same play on a family outside Atlanta. That family wasn't as lucky as we were. They'd already sent the full amount before anyone thought to check. Caleb still winces sometimes when her name comes up. I don't think that ever fully goes away, and I don't think it should. A man ought to remember what nearly cost him everything, so he recognizes the shape of it the next time it shows up wearing a different face. Some fathers win by handing their sons everything and hoping it teaches them something. I've found there's a sharper kind of winning in making a man see the truth with his own eyes first, even when it costs you weeks of silence and a son who thinks you're the enemy for a while. That he doesn't think that anymore, and the $200,000 I could have lost right alongside him is still sitting exactly where it belongs, waiting for a version of my son who earned the right to be trusted with it. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from.